Welcome to my series on what it's like to be a woman in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormon Church, also known as LDS. Hi, my name is Sharon Eubanks. I'm a lifetime happy, active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And this video is one of many in a series I have planned about what it's like from my point of view to be in my church. Today, I'm going to address the topic of what it's like to live in a power structure known as a patriarchy within a church that has multiple levels of leadership, much of it male-dominated. What is my experience like? Is it any good? Is it negative? How do I cope with power differences? How do I cope with voice? Am I heard? Am I treated well? Do I feel like I have power? And what do I think about some of the, I would say, accusations that some women have against church leaders wielding too much power? I will also talk a fair amount about trauma because I have a trauma history and it has informed all aspects of my life, including how I approach power, sharing power, voice, and levels of leadership within an organization. I'm also a therapist, and so I see into people's lives where they struggle in power structures. Now, here's my disclaimer to start off. I am just sharing my thoughts. I'm trying very hard to be integrous with genuine experiences that I have so that you can see from an actual member inside what it's like to be in my church. I'm not going to quote statistics or quote church leaders. This is just my story. Okay, so let's start at the beginning of the questions. Do I feel like I'm treated well as a woman in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? I would say that I feel like I'm treated very well. Now, I don't know how some people measure their treatment, but I measure it on metrics of, do I feel respected? Do I feel like I get help when I need it? Do I feel like I'm loved and cared about? I would say very much so. I would give my experience a 10 out of 10. Now, I'm going to tell you a story that's personal that doesn't sound like it has much to do with church. And I think this illustrates where I'm going with this. It's personal because the church is all about teaching us how to be happy in families. So this is not a story between me and a bishop or me and a second counselor in the bishopric or something. This is a story between me and my husband. Okay, so just a few days ago, we were cleaning up from camping and we both had some jobs assigned to us. I had said I was going to clean up inside the trailer and he was going to clean up outside the trailer. He finished his chores before me and he came in. I was feeling a little bit behind, so I started to apologize, as a lot of sensitive, caring women tend to do, not because I'm a pushover and I don't have any self-esteem, but because I'm considerate and I wanted to keep up with the amount of work he was doing. I wanted to pull my weight. It's just being considerate. It's not because I'm weak. But I was apologizing. I said, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I'm kind of falling behind. I'm not keeping up with you. And he stopped and he said, sweetheart, I love you. You're fine. You can go at your own pace. I'm just here to help you. You don't need to stress. And I love you. Now, that experience is a great illustration of how I feel like my experience has been largely as a woman in the church and reflected into my home life, which is where all the teachings that we get in church are where the rubber meets the road. Because a man in church is taught to be considerate, caring, loving, and patient to his wife. He is taught not to wield power, not to wield authority, not to be rude and mean and strong-arm her. So that is where I felt in that moment, I am being treated just like how Christ would want my husband to treat me. This is what my husband is taught to do in our marriage. And he is a wonderful man, so he does that, and it works beautifully. Now, as far as in levels of leadership, dealing with power structures and hierarchies in the church, do I feel like I'm treated well? Yes, I do. I struggled with my health a few years ago, and so I needed to be released from a calling. I wasn't upset because my bishop didn't read my mind and anticipate my need. I didn't expect him to have a crystal ball. I was perfectly fine to just schedule an appointment with him and let him know my health is struggling. I'm under a lot of stress in my family. I need to be released. And I also had some other things that I expressed to him. He is a young bishop and he is confident, and he had asked me to do more in a couple of other callings than I was really capable of doing. And I started to cry in the meeting, and I said, I also feel like you've asked a little bit too much of me, and you might want to be more sensitive to other people in my position. And he listened with so much care and love to what I had to say. And every time I saw him after that in the hall and around the neighborhood, he would just say, hi, how are you doing? With so much love and care in his eyes. He didn't have judgment for me because I'd asked to be released from a calling. He didn't seem like weirded out or freaked out because I'd given him pushback and said, hey, you're really asking more than I can do. But some of that is on me too, because I had the courage to speak and say, I can't handle all of this and I need a change. And I think there's a lot of perfectionism and black and white thinking that happens in some women's hearts and minds when they feel like they're being pushed around by men. Because if I had not spoken to my bishop about my struggles, and I had just thought, well, he's the one that has the priesthood power, and he told me to stay in this calling, and God told me I had to keep it, or I'm bad, I'm getting negative tally marks in heaven. Well, that's that person's black and white thinking and perfectionism that's the problem. It's not the bishop. Because in my situation, I had the courage to speak and say, it's too much. And I also think that I've been pushed a little, and I'd like you to be a little more aware of people in my situation, and I need out. And he heard it. He was fine. But that's because I approached it with confidence, also some desperation, but confidence that I knew that I was valid and I knew that I would be heard. So I do think that a lot of the struggles that some women have is this black and white thinking and this perfectionistic attitude of I'm not even allowed. But the thing is if you have learned helplessness and you don't allow yourself to speak up when there's a concern, that is a you thing. It's not a church structure thing. That is on you to be assertive and to figure that out. So, okay, the question, am I treated well? Absolutely. Because my husband goes to church and learns, and in the scriptures and in all of his studying and in prayer and in trying to emulate Jesus Christ, that his duty is to treat me with love and respect and care and loyalty and fidelity. And he does, and it feels great. And I respect myself enough to speak to my bishop, or if there was another situation, I would speak out about it. If I had a problem, I could talk about it with respect and care and expecting to be heard. Now, I'm going to tell you one more story about dealing with power in the church that didn't go as well, and I have a couple of thoughts about that. Several years ago, I had a Relief Society president. This is funny because it was actually a woman that caused me trouble. And I needed to make a change. It was during this same period of time where I was having some health problems. And I needed to ask to be released from my ministering calling, which she is over the ministering. And I let her know that I was not feeling able to perform this calling, and I needed to have her back off and, take me off of the list of ministers. And she gave me a lot of pushback. She shamed me. She says, don't you know how to support the priesthood? Did you raise your hand to support the bishop in his calling? Well, then you are obligated to do your ministering. And here's another thing about me that I think is important. It's not me as in just me, but how I approached this, that there's a lesson here. I knew that was a her thing. That was her issue. That was her pride. It was her power. It was her lack of understanding or her mistaken way of trying to respect God by pushing me around. And I had to do a lot of praying to have patience with her and to speak clearly at the same time. So we continued to have a little bit of dialogue about this, and I let her know that I was not going to keep the ministering calling. I needed to be taken out of it, and that she's mistaken. I do support the bishop, but how I go about supporting the bishop is my business. So again, I'm going to go back to this template that I was talking about a minute ago. This black and white thinking and perfectionism is the problem. So if I was perfectionistic and I felt like I needed my Relief Society president to think good of me, or if I was black and white thinking and I thought, oh, I either am a good church member or I'm a bad church member, either one of those would have screwed with my head so hard. But I'm not that way, thankfully, because I've learned a few things. So I know that if I don't have the ability to perform in a church calling and I need to ask to be released, that doesn't make me a bad person at all. See, that's because I have some health around that. I've been able to work through those kinds of issues in my life. But if I had not worked through that, and I had the black and white thinking and thought, oh, I'm a bad church member if I ask, then when she would have given me the pushback, if I finally felt like I could ask to be released and she gave me pushback, don't you sustain the priesthood? Which, again, I'm going to point out, a man has never said that to me. A man has never said that to me. It was a woman who said that to me. But if I had black and white thinking, I'd be like, oh no, maybe she's right. Maybe I'm the worst. Maybe God hates me, which would be my misunderstanding. It would not be the priesthood pushing me around. It would be my mental health issues. So I was able to deal with this woman who was totally out of line because I avoided black and white thinking of I'm either good or bad. I knew that I was just coping with life. There's nothing wrong with that. And I also didn't have the perfectionism of needing to be seen as this perfect church member. If she wants to think I'm an idiot or a jerk or I don't have a testimony, that is her problem. I know what I'm about. So, okay, going back to this, wrapping it with a bow. Am I treated well in church? Yes, yes, yes. But if I had black and white thinking and perfectionism, I could tell myself the story that I wasn't, because I wouldn't have the courage to speak up and talk to my bishop if I had a struggle. I wouldn't have the wherewithal to give pushback to a Relief Society Relief Society president who was wielding power. But because I'm in a good place with that, I can see that they're just a human that needs information or a human that can be disregarded in their opinion. I think that's really important to understand. So you can self-assess if you feel like you're in some kind of power struggle or you're not being treated well. Maybe it literally is you. Okay, that's just a thought. All right, another question. Have I had negative experiences with power in the church? I've already covered some of this to some degree. The Relief Society president was a bad experience. The bishop experience I talked about a second ago, it actually wasn't bad. He was never unkind or rude or whatever. He just asked a lot of me because I appeared very capable, and I let him know that I wasn't as capable as he thought, and we all moved on. So it was fine. I have to really dig deep to think, have I ever been mistreated by anybody in power? And honestly, I can tell you the answer is no. And here's how hard I have to data mine for that. I can think of one time that a bishop once, when I was asking for some welfare help during my divorce years ago, was quite sparse with his help. He seemed hesitant to pay my utility bills that I really needed him to pay. And I did not appreciate that. I felt kind of, it was unfair because I really did need the help, and I wasn't asking out of line. So I thought that was not very nice, but I got over it because he's just a human being and he didn't understand. And asterisk, I was eventually able to pay all my bills one way or another anyway, so it just isn't that big of a deal. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 0. And I could also say, have I ever mistreated anyone at church? And the answer is HE double hockey sticks. Yes, I have. I have missed people's social cues and maybe not, looked past them, or maybe I've said something in a class that offended somebody. There was one time in a class that I actually said something that made someone leave in tears, and I just thought it was funny. I didn't realize. But these things happen. This is normal. That's why our ward is called a ward family, because we're like family. We struggle to learn how to get along sometimes. I have never knowingly hurt someone at church, but of course I know I have. There was that one time and I tried to smooth it over and it all blew over and it was fine. But also, I think it's important when you're looking at, hey, am I being hurt or harmed by people in power at church? Ask yourself, Have you ever hurt anyone when you've been in a place of power? And if you're honest with yourself, the answer is yes. And that helps give a little perspective around, what you're demanding of other people as well. Okay, here's a question. How do I cope with power differences in church, like not being allowed to be put in as like a bishop, or, not holding that official priesthood that allows you to be the man in charge? Well, I don't know. This is where I'm going to get into trauma history stuff a little bit. I think it's because of my history and maybe my temperament, my personality, that literally feels to me like a 0 on a scale of 1 out of 10. Because I know what it's like to really genuinely have no power and to really genuinely be mistreated. So I have a trauma history where I was raised in a home with an alcoholic, a highly abusive dad who abused all of his children in most ways, but not always, but he definitely abused in all of the ways. And he was sociopathologically level violent. I won't get into details, but it was an extreme case that threatened multiple family members' lives multiple times. And my mom, although she was a battered woman, she was not a quiet, timid little creature. In fact, part of the reason that her and her husband struggled so much is she would always tell him what she thought, and she wasn't very tactful about it. She eventually left, and it took her many years, because anyone that works with or understands or knows or has been close to someone in a domestic violence situation knows just how hard it is to get out, especially when you don't have education or money or resources, anything like that. And my mom definitely did not have resources. But what I learned by watching all those years is no power is way different than just moaning about not being the queen bee. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but like if you are being beaten and not allowed safety, you can't even have an opinion. That is a lack of safety that was very, very concerning. And I saw that at home. At church, I've never seen anything remotely like that. I've never been intimidated emotionally or anything. But also, I think it's really helped me that I've had a super reality check experience of I know what it actually feels like to be terrified and with no power. And that is this level of physical aggression, violence, yelling, screaming, throwing things, demanding, forcing, controlling, all of this intimidation that I lived under with my dad. I know what a man out of control with power is. And that is a very different story than a good man who holds the priesthood, who's trying to serve in a calling, who's a little insensitive, or cuts you off mid-sentence because he's a little confused, or didn't remember something you said 5 weeks ago and then forgot and did something else. I think it's just given me a lot of perspective having that trauma history, because I can honestly say from my perspective, a lot of the whining that happens around not having power at church is petty. We have a lot of power as women. Women are the most influential creatures in the world. We have lots of ideas, lots of emotions. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, and anyone who thinks about that for very long knows it. That the men who are quote unquote in power are serving. Do I want to have to arrive early, stay late, set up all the chairs, give all the blessings, give all the callings, do all those things? And I know this is an argument that has been made before, but honestly, I've got my hands full being a woman. I don't need all of those responsibilities too. And anyone that studies women's brains knows that women think broadly. They have lots of ideas. They see deeply into the heart of the situation. If they just listen to their intuition, their calendar's full of good things to do. Men are not geared the same. And this is not a better than, worse than. They're just geared differently. So if they need assignments specifically of how to serve in really concrete ways, and again, this is not better than worse than, it's just different, then they actually need that because they don't see all of the things that the women see. So the women can self-assign, I see this needs to happen, this needs to happen. But the men, it's really useful for them to have structured sets of things that they can do to serve their families and their communities and their ward. Why would we feel jealous about the fact that they've got all these assigned roles? It seems super unnecessary. And I would never argue, if somebody has a really genuine story that they struggle with, I'm never going to argue with somebody. If they've got a story where they've had problems with men in power, perfect. I would love to see them work through that. I do not doubt that they're telling the truth. That's fine. But I'm just here telling my story, and my experience has been very, very good. Now, I have seen as a therapist some stories of people being, I would say, traumatized in a different way at home. So I'm still talking about this coping with power differences. Have I had any negative experiences? The answer is no, but I do want to illustrate that there is space for, and I get that some people definitely have. Three clients come to my mind, and all three of them left the church specifically because of power abuses. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. And here's where I think the whole issue is misunderstood completely. And that is that these three clients they figure very prominently in my thought process as I think about people leaving the church and dealing with power struggles with church. All three of them left because of power issues at home. In the home, mom and dad, and what was happening there that was not centered in Christ, that was not sanctioned on church teachings. It was not appropriate. It was wrong and abusive in every way. And they left because they were deeply hurt by those kinds of experiences that caused them to see the church through this lens. It's like this demonizing, black, gray, smoky lens of anger and frustration and powerlessness, voicelessness. And I get that. And I know God gets that too. If someone's had like deep trauma and that it's associated in some way with the church and they're going to leave because of that, hey, that's their journey. And we have to work through our traumas. So I don't have a problem with someone being on their journey. But I will say that, okay, if we go back to my trauma, what I went through was such extreme abuses from the hands of a angry, controlling, sociopathological man that I go to church and I deal with my wonderful husband now, and I see them actually just trying to serve me and, be patient. And if they can't be perfectly patient all the time or they make one wrong move, I'm not blowing up or freaking out because I've got an index of what the extreme actually looks like, not just from watching a movie or reading a novel. Like I know day to day the heartbreak and the fear that can happen. But there is a different situation that I don't relate with, but I've helped clients through it, that is just as poisonous, but even more so in a different way. And that is when mom and dad force and shame, control, judge, and tighten around church practices at home so hard that what they're teaching does not even resemble the gospel of Jesus Christ, which the gospel of Jesus Christ is centered on charity, on self-control, patience, right? And on modeling these behaviors to our children. But the tightening and the shaming is so extreme that I can understand why someone would say, if they came from a home like that, that they would say, oh, the church is super controlling and shaming. Because if they're getting that at home and then they go to church already primed from the messages at home that they're shamed somehow, or that they've got to be perfect somehow. Again, that black and white thinking and that perfectionism, if they've been primed with those at home, then they step into the church environment where there's a conversation on modesty. And they're like, oh, I have to do this perfect or I'm bad. Or, the black and white thinking, there's the good kids and the bad kids. If you learn it at home, there's nothing that 2-3 hours at church can do to undo shaming messages at home. And I want to put it out there that although there are plenty of Latter-day Saint parents who are shaming and hyper-controlling, those same characteristics are in every home. You know, in any demographic, you're going to have some people struggling with that in some of the homes, in atheist homes, in Jewish homes, in Protestant evangelical homes. Any of these homes, you're going to find some of the parents are hyper-controlling, judgmental, black and white thinking, living their life on the checklist. It's going to be a different checklist based on which environment. And yes, our church is trying and has tried and is continuing to try to say, work for the Spirit, keep charity with you, please do it the right way. But just because the members don't hear the message and don't implement it right and end up shaming and hyper-controlling their kids, that is a them thing. That is their pride. That's their personality. It's their trauma. It's their own life story. And I have sadly seen my clients project their story of how their parents screwed up trying to be Christ-like with their kids, which it doesn't sound like they even understood how to be Christ-like with their kids. They just wanted to hyper-control them. But these kids come out of these homes and think it's the church's fault. The church told my parents to be that way. Because again, if you're at home and your dad's all over you about modesty or about exact number of minutes per day of reading the scriptures or perfect, I mean, one of my clients, he was shamed for bringing a Diet Coke into the house, or excuse me, a caffeine-free Coke into the house, which by the way, we have nothing against caffeine in our church. But it's one of those little cultural weird things that happened for a while where some people felt like it was wrong. I never thought it was wrong. I think that's ridiculous. But whatever, if some people went through that, I don't care. But his mom was so, like, she would have a panic attack if he would bring a decaffeinated Coke into the house. And this was only the tip of the iceberg. And so I can honestly see if someone was raised that way and then they went to church and then someone's talking, hey, we really need to make sure we obey the word of wisdom. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, I can't even come near my house with a decaffeinated Coke or I'm a sinner. Then he's sitting there in church being re-traumatized because he's projecting onto his church experience the crap he's getting at home. So why am I talking about all of this? Well, the trauma that you have, whether it's one way or another, can really color how you see the church. And remarkably, my trauma, which many would consider the worst kind, has poised me to see my church with so much appreciation. A church that tries to teach men to be loving to their wives and stay off alcohol and be true to them and faithful to them and kind and patient. Thank you. This is wonderful. But another family who they're hyper controlling, just choking them at home with the checklist. Then they go to church and they just feel like it's more of the same, but now their parents are being backed up by this big power structure. So I would say that kind of experience at home is more likely for someone to say, oh, there's power problems at church. But again, it's the black and white thinking and the perfectionism in the homes of those families and of those individuals. And people that leave the church tend to have a lot of that thinking as well. But so, okay, to tie that one up with a bow, how do I cope with power differences in church? Well, because of my experience, I don't see them. I see the men serving and putting themselves out there to help. And I see all of us being taught how to elevate ourselves and be closer to Jesus Christ. Okay, my next question is, do I feel heard within the structure of my church? The power structures that be. And I would say resoundingly yes. And I have a little bit of a story about that as well. So I was, again, like I say, raised by a mother who was abused. And she was very clear when I was growing up, whenever she was around a woman that just only praised her husband, that made her stomach turn. She hated it. She would say, that's ridiculous. That woman needs to grow a brain, that kind of thing. She just hated it when women were super breathy and like, oh, my husband's just wonderful. So I was raised in such a way to expect to have a voice and to expect that the guys had better walk the line. So I think that has primed me to just try to speak out and try to expect a little something. And it's not because men are bad. I love my husband and I love the men in my church, but because I was exposed to a truly bad man and a woman that wouldn't have it, I kind of just, again, I have a different point of view that if I'm treated with respect and if my ideas are basically heard, that's being heard. I don't need the red carpet to be rolled out, and I don't need to feel like the woman has to praise her man and then he just has to like hear every single thing she says. Like, sometimes guys can be jerks, and I honestly haven't seen that at church, but I'm just saying, so sometimes people are people, and we don't need to drip all over and act like they're perfect. We can just expect a normal level of human communication and own our part, and they can own their part, and then our standards are kind of, normal, so that we can say, yeah, we feel heard, instead of this elevated, it's just the high standards that I think set people up to fail. Because I've had pretty low standards in the past with kind of raised with this mother who had a snippy attitude. I've learned, hey, just speak up and don't expect the world. But if you don't speak up, you're not going to get anything. And then if you expect the world on a silver platter, you're going to be disappointed, because it's the real world and we all have to share and get along. I have another little story. My neighbor was just sharing with me something that happened with her husband a few years ago. He was put in as the Elders Quorum president a few years ago, which is a visible role in our church. And within the first week, he came home one day and he just says, oh, great, I've offended somebody. And now they're probably going to leave the church and they're probably going to blame me. Now, this guy is probably one of the nicest people I've ever met. He's always testifying of Christ. He's patient and loving. He's great to his family. He's a wonderful person. And if he said something that offended somebody, it probably was that person just taking it wrong and misunderstanding. And he felt really bad. And he says, I just don't want to be the reason somebody leaves the church. But can we have a little empathy for the guys in leadership positions? How hard it must be to have people just staring at them and breathing down their necks and just waiting for them to make one wrong move. So let's just pause for a second before we throw out accusations of all these people in power and these men and all that they're trying to control women. I think there's a lot more fear than it has anything to do with reality. Another thing about men in power is nobody gets a church calling that they campaign for. If a man is put in a position he did not ask for it, a lot of times he's not prepared. He kind of doesn't even want it. And when he is put in, it's only for a few years, and then he's taken out and someone else is put in. Our bishopric just changed a couple of weeks ago, and my husband was in the bishopric, and he had a 3-day notice for when he was going to be released, and the new guy had a 3-day notice for when he was being put in. And that Sunday he hits the ground running, and here you go. So how much training did he have? None for the first day. And then he has to just hurry and play catch up. So it's not this desire to just again, it's not a job you apply for. It's not something you campaign for. That these guys that are in positions that are more prominent are giving service. They're not being paid, and they didn't ask for it. Okay, I want to share a couple of thoughts about some of these women's accusations that it's so unfair that they don't get all the power in church. I really kind of think that sometimes these women are bored. They just haven't seen real tragedies in life, and they have so much support and health and resources that they don't know what else to complain about. So they're picking some pretty low-hanging fruit there. And I don't have a huge amount of empathy for that. Again, if someone's had an extreme situation, I wish them the best, and I encourage them to forgive and to work through that sensibly. But I have a story to share about what I think, how we really ought to approach people in any kind of prominent position of church leadership. and that is the parable of cooking. That's what I'll call it. So I used to hate cooking years ago in my first marriage. In my second marriage, I love cooking. Why? Why do I love cooking now where I used to hate it before? Well, the difference is how I'm treated, how I'm received, how my meals are approached. In my first marriage, he did not want to help with dishes. If I dirtied too many dishes while I was cooking, that was like a sin or a black mark on my soul or something. And I was not given much of a budget for food. I was always underfunded. He would not show up for dinner, and on and on. So you can see why maybe a woman would not find a lot of joy in cooking. If she can't afford the ingredients, no one will help her, and only her and the little kids can eat dinner, and the man's nowhere near. So that led to me hating cooking. But many years later, totally different situation. My husband, we have a very generous grocery budget. He helps, he praises my cooking. He's so grateful. Always saying thank you and showing appreciation. So I love cooking. Now, leaders in the church are kind of like the cooks in the kitchen. They are busy doing a lot of work. And if the only thing we can say is, you're doing it wrong, you're pushing us around, you're not sharing your power, you're not listening to our voices, and they're like, dudes, I'm trying my best. Like, what do you want me to do? Please tell me what you want me to do. We're going to just actually make the situation worse than if we show some appreciation and gratitude for the service we're being given and pitch in positive ways. Then we all rise together. So again, I don't have a huge amount, if we're talking about my feelings on some really vocal, I would say negative women, I don't have a huge amount of empathy. Again, if somebody has a severe story, I wish them all the best. I hope they work through it in a healthy way. But tearing down the structures that be is, foolish, I think. Now, I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of quick things. The last one is my thoughts on polygamy. But before I get to that, I want to talk for a minute about priesthood blessings and how much they have affected my life, profoundly affected my life. Now, for those of you who don't know, a priesthood blessing is when usually your husband or dad, or maybe it can be another elder in the church, comes and lays hands on your head and gives an official blessing, which is this nice long prayer for your health and well-being. That has absolutely healed and changed and blessed my life in so many ways. And I don't really know how adequately to express my gratitude for priesthood blessings, but I think I need to in light of this conversation around power and men and church structure. Women already are out there nurturing and giving so much. We're naturally hardwired and we need help. And you know what has been amazing for me when I'm just struggling with whatever load I've got? Whenever I have needed a blessing from the priesthood, I've been able to get that. Usually it's been from my husband. And the men are usually a little more free and able to do that because they're not nervous Nellies running around taking care of everything. How wonderful it is to have a man come give you a blessing, a man who's a calming presence. He's not bringing all this emotional energy or like trying to intrude or overserve. He's just coming to give me a blessing, and it is a beautiful thing. Women have their place and their role. I've had times that Relief Society women have served me when I've had babies or when I've had illnesses or when I've been going through some difficult times, and they minister in a way that only they can minister, having these wonderful deep conversations, bringing me meals, anticipating needs that I might have. But there's nothing like a priesthood blessing. It has its own place, and it is from the men, and it is from the priesthood, and it's from this power structure, and I need it, and I love it, and I want it. And I don't know what else to say about that other than it feels great when you're down to have a power structure to rely on to come bless you. And not just a structure, it's a human being calling down power from God to help you. But I'm saying, why would we denigrate these structures that help us, that provide support for us? I love being able to call on the priesthood when I need a blessing and when I need strength. And if I was at the top of all the power hierarchies, who would I call on? another person, I guess. And I know that that's kind of a weak argument, but it's mine. I don't mind not always being in charge. I actually like the role that I have in the home. I like being in the home, doing that. I have a career, but I like cooking and cleaning and taking care of the inside things. And my husband tends to like taking care of the outside things, fixing the vehicles and the sprinklers, those kinds of things. But this might sound like I'm going off topic, but I'm not, because we can have different levels of participation, and one can look more prominent and one can look bigger or smaller, but they all fit together. And also, do you really want to always do everything? No, you've got to share. So I don't mind sharing with the priesthood members. And also, asterisk, endowed women have priesthood power from their temple covenant. So I'm not even talking about, do I not have any priesthood power? But within structures, within the church, let's just admit, sharing the roles is great. And I love to get priesthood blessings from those dear men, usually my husband, when I'm in need. Okay, I want to end by sharing a couple of thoughts on polygamy. This might seem like it's a little bit disconnected, but I just wanted to throw it in here at the end anyway, because it is kind of a feminist question, is how fair or unfair is it to women that men get to be sealed to more than one woman in the temple, but women cannot be sealed to more than one man in the temple. So just to clarify, for those who aren't members of my church, our church used to practice polygamy a long time ago, and we don't now. So I'm not talking about current practices. But if a man, because we do marriages in the temple, marries a woman and then she dies, he can marry another woman in the temple, and he technically has two wives in heaven, so to speak. But a woman can't do that. She can only have one temple marriage husband. So I've heard some women say that that's ridiculous, that's unfair, the man gets this unfair advantage. Well, I'm going to point out something that just seems so ridiculously logical that I don't know why this is even an issue. If you think about it, it has to be one or the other. Either men get multiple wives or women get multiple husbands. One or the other, because if it's both, then you're going to have marriage disintegrates. It becomes meaningless, because this man is married to two women, but his two wives each have one has two husbands and one has three husbands, and those three husbands each have two wives, and then everybody's married to each other's cousin's dog's neighbor. Like it's just one big globby group wedding. Marriage would cease to have meaning at all if it went in both directions. So then, okay, well, let's do a thought experiment. What if it was women then? Why didn't God make it women? Well, have you noticed the birth rate? That there are more women born than men. I think it's 51% females, 49% males. So there's going to be more women. There are more women. Further, have you noticed who tends to be more God-fearing and maybe even more righteous? Well, women. This is not a commentary on men are evil and they're not going to heaven. There's going to be tons of men in heaven, plenty of both. But just look at these numbers. If slightly more women than men are in heaven, if slightly more women than men are born, you have a surplus of women. So if God has to choose one, it's going to be men that end up having some multiple wives, and not all of them, but some of them will have to. I don't have any problem with that, and it really is just a basic math problem. So all of the emotion and frustration and all of that is a total waste of time. Just do math. It's very simple. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this. I've tried to be very sincere about my feelings. I love my church. I love the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It teaches men to be good to women. It honors our voices. If we project onto it perfectionism and black and white thinking, if we project onto it our trauma of being controlled and shamed, then we will indeed have a problem. But that is our own problem. And if we've even encountered a leader or teacher that has been black and white or shaming, that is their problem. That does not characterize the church. All the church callings are constantly churning and switching around. So someone who is a teacher this year isn't next year. Someone that's a bishop this year isn't next year. There's not this static level of leadership. It's constantly churning, and that's so that we can learn charity and patience with each other and learn all kinds of skills and things from each other. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please feel free to put in the comments below if you have any kind and honest-hearted questions or comments, and I will be sure to get to those. Thank you so much, and I'll see you